recording. So last week, what we finished off with is a description of building the canvas. So that was rather than go through all of that again today, I just wanted to remind you that you setting up some sort of template to capture the demand, I think is very important, because then that's the first step in your organization. And whether you use the canvas that we provided as a potential solution there, or use something else, that you think of that demand as when you organize that as a card, right? That's a card that we're eventually delivering, and we're going to work with that card and create additional cards, because where we're going with this is not just a Kanban for a team to deliver items, but a program level Kanban, okay, which shows the major deliverables, the roadmap, in other words, the roadmap items, along a roadmap of delivery against various releases. Okay. Now these can get very complex, these program roadmaps, but we do want this to be an information radiator. It's something that we communicate to all of the stakeholders, in a public place where we can put it up and people can interact with it. And as we get more into steering and the steering function, we'll describe that a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and skip through the whole build the canvas part of it, because I think that resulted in some kind of, I wouldn't say perplexed faces, but hopefully it gave you some ideas of how to collect the demand and start organizing the information. But what I'd like to start with then is to go back to this slide here, which is the PMO alignment. When we say the PMO, we're talking about the value-driven PMO, because ultimately what we're trying to get to is value realization, right? Value realization occurs when the customer is satisfied and we are able to capitalize and leverage that satisfaction to improve our own reputation, our own return on investment, justify our spend, as the case may be. That's really what it's all about. And so just as we go through this, we'll talk about value stream steering and how that provides the strategy, priorities, resources, and requirements for the PMO, which can govern the roles, responsibilities, progress, flow, organizational change, requirements, track the value realization, and apply the governance as appropriate. And I know that it's difficult. It's very difficult to be a PMO with no teeth, right? But if you just remove that statement there of governance, I still think the PMO can provide an understanding of the work items, the architecture associated with it, the guidance on how delivery can occur, okay? Training for the teams. Now, what happens then as the teams deliver their work, they're going to describe the dependencies on that value, the feedback, and any issues. The PMO can then facilitate that with also sharing back to the value stream steering the benefits and the metrics. Okay. So any question, oh, by the way, there still is a need for a PM team. Project management does not go away. Matter of fact, project management is even that much more important in the value-driven PMO. Now, this is contrary to a lot of people in the Agile community. They say, well, we'll just deliver a bunch of MVPs and MBIs and MMPs and all those different things, right? We don't need project management because we have self-organized teams. Well, the problem that you find, and what I see in organizations, whether it be scaled Agile, Scrum of Scrums, or whatever, is when you get into the enterprise level, there has to be an adherence to the overall strategy and an alignment of where you're trying to go. And so who does that work? And if the program is left to do it on its own, that's going to be very difficult without some way of enabling the execution of that strategy within the teams. That is the role of the project manager, is to enable the execution in the teams by ensuring that the teams have everything they need. If you want a self-directed team to make good decisions, they need all the information that they need to make good decisions. Otherwise, what are they going to make? Bad decisions, right? They're going to make incomplete decisions or uninformed decisions, and so on and so forth. So we talked about this a little bit with the whole information pyramid, where data is analyzed in context to become information, which is then shared in reporting. If you want self-organized, self-directing teams to be competent, we have to reverse that. So management becomes kind of that organizer of data, which then eventually through information is reported to the team so that the team can make good decisions, because that's the best decisions are made at the point of integration of the information. If management's not willing to make that shift, then you can't really expect self-directing teams. Sorry, that's the trade-off, right? And so most organizations that is the most difficult transition, and I'm not going to use the word transformation anymore. It's the most difficult transition, right? As I talked about last week, the quote I saw that really caused me to think is, insects transform, mammals grow, right? We talk a lot about transformation and things like that. Well, that's becoming a whole new creature, right? No, organizations don't become a whole new creature. They grow and mature into a better, more efficient creature. And so it's a transition in thought. It's a transition in mindset. Okay. So what I'd like to do then, or before I move on with this, any questions on this, the alignment? Peggy, are we speaking your language yet?
Just a generic clarification. You all know that we have an official PMO. When we talk about all this, we're also talking about the Department of Central IT as replace the word PMO on the diagram with Central IT, and it's the same thing, because the agreement that we have with Dusty is that there will be projects that are going to be led and executed and managed directly through Central IT and guided and influenced by Dusty's standards and overall knowledge in a support manner. And the PMO will also use this same approach, but on projects that are delegated to them. That could be coming from Central IT, but they could be coming from Fleet or from other departments. So the word PMO in here means an office, a team of people that are performing these activities that are listed under, and they are guiding the project managers on the different teams and groups. They could also mean that for Central IT.
Okay. Any other clarifications or questions on this model? Well, actually, one more clarification on my part. And again, I've used the XP, Scrum, traditional, and Kanban icons here, but you could just as easily insert iterative, incremental, agile lifecycle, lean lifecycle, continuous delivery, agile, continuous delivery, lean. Anyway, whatever patterns. The point is that, and as I've proven with programs that have been delivered in the corporate world, we don't have to prescribe how each team is supposed to work, because the situation may not fit that delivery method or that life cycle. And so can we allow teams to work in their own methods, practices, and life cycles? Absolutely, because they own the deliverable, right? They have to own how they get it done. And the people closest to the work are the people that are best suited to describe how the work should be delivered. That is a key tenet of the value-driven PMO, is let the people closest to the work determine how that work should be delivered. And if they're saying all work needs to be delivered just one way, then they just need additional training because that can't possibly be, because we run into situations all the time within IT or within business projects where that's not just simply not the case. Okay, that's the primary tenet of it. So, are you ready to move on and go down the rabbit hole a little bit further? All right. So with that, this is what I would describe as the program flow. So this is what we've been talking about from the various aspects up until this point. So on the demand side, we expect the value stream steering, right? Keeping in mind that we described value stream, we spent quite a bit of time on value stream. If the first two lessons especially are really important from a value stream perspective, is we want the value, we need to understand our value streams, the court, fleet, what's that metric, like reading the electrical meters, what do you call them, utilities, or all these different value streams. We are going to get demand at the enterprise level from all these different value streams. We want the value stream steering to be very much integrated with the selection process for that demand, that they only pass on the demand that is worthy of consideration. In other words, it's worthy of consideration because we can articulate the value that is needed, and there's at least some semblance of sanity to it, right? There's a lot of requests. Anybody feel like the business is ever going to be satisfied? Like, okay, IT, you're done. We have everything we need. Like, is that going to happen? Not, it hasn't happened anywhere I've gone, right? And Laz, I'm sure you live that world. It's like there's always more demand than there are resources to deliver against the demand. That is always the case, whether it be time, money, or whatever the case may be. Okay. So where the program comes in is the program is going to run the flow of taking those OKRs. And for those of you that just joined us, OKR means objective key result. Now we're deriving the objective key result for all the various projects that are requested by establishing what it is we're trying to accomplish and how do we know from an outcome perspective that we've met that objective. Okay. So OKRs, some of you are familiar with SMART goals, SMART. You can even use SMART goals if you want. It's really the same thing from that perspective. Scott, you have a question?
Yeah, I can't see the font. Like the text is really small.
Yeah, these are just icons of
Okay.
objects that we discussed previously.
Gotcha. So these slide decks are available in the Learning Portal too?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, this is found in section 3. By the way, I'm going to, based upon the results of the pilot, I'm going to reorganize that learning management system a little bit. But I do want to tell you, we don't cut off your access to that, like, ever. So even as we make changes, we just don't. I mean, there are some organizations like, you only have access for a year, right? It's like why, right? There's going to be changes to the course as we go along and stuff like that. And you'll see those changes updated and you can check back. And we want to be your partner in learning for the long term. And so there's always going to be some value in that. I mean, so hopefully some value. We're not here to, cut off your access. It seems just so, I don't know, Genghis Khan-like, right?
Thanks, Dan.
I mean, it's like, so yeah, And as we move along in our relationship, also, if you want additional help with any of these tools, we're certainly happy to work with you on that. Okay, but where we're going is we're going to take those OKRs and we're going to prioritize them, and then in order to align them to the patterns, we're going to have to break them apart or align them to our MBIs and our MVPs. Okay, so for those of you that joined us, this is what we're talking about at the program level for small batches. So small batches are described as MVPs, MMPs, or MBIs. MVP, minimal viable product, is probably the most misused term. Matter of fact, I was working with a client yesterday afternoon that was totally butchering the term, and the instructor in me wanted to step in and correct them, but I am the consultant, and so sometimes you just have to take them aside and say, here's another way of thinking. But because the MVP is only originally designed, you do an MVP to prove whether or not value can be achieved. Okay, an MVP is an experiment on if value can be achieved and if that value is strong enough for us to continue. Right? It is an experiment, so be careful about how many experiments you do. A minimal marketable product is the smallest batch of work that can be marketed for full use and value to be achieved. Okay, so you may think of minimum marketable product as any number of features, right, that make up a package for which we expect to get value from. Okay, from now on in the course, I'm not going to refer to MMP because there's an overlap with the concept of MBI, minimum business increment. So minimum business increment is the smallest batch of item for which you can specifically describe the value. Okay, so the reason why I would call out MBI over MMP is MBI could be one feature. In other words, it could be even a smaller work item, especially when you consider continuous delivery lean. If I were working towards an MMP, which is a collection of features, that's going to be real difficult to deliver in continuous delivery lean because eventually it has to make up a package, whereas an MBI can stand on its own. And so for this course, I'm going to focus in on MVPs and MBIs. Then we align them to the patterns and help the teams organize the work within those patterns and then schedule it on a program Kanban, which shows your roadmap for release. Now, I'm going to spend the better part of today, well, all of today, and probably a good portion of tomorrow, working our way through this picture. Okay, so what we're going to start with this morning is that prioritization and how that prioritization will work. And then the alignment will come next. We'll see how far we get with scheduling because we're going to be doing a lot of practical exercises. Okay, as such. And then also the resource management. And the one thing I'll add tomorrow is our risk management associated with this as well, because there's always going to be some risk at the program level. Okay. Now, before we go too far here, though, what I would like to describe is the team of teams. When we say a team, the program is a team. There's a program manager, but the program manager is always or the PMO manager or director or whoever that is, Dusty or Laz or Peggy or whoever, right? The program or PMO lead is always going to need additional support and help. And you're going to comprise a team of people to help with that. Now, they may not work directly for you, right? But it's still going to be a team of teams. What we mean by that is each team, whether it be Peggy's team, Jamie's team, Chris's team, or whatever the case may be, each team has a leadership component. There's a leadership within that. Okay. The program team has representation then from each team's leadership. The program manager facilitates the program team. The team of teams is going to aid in all of those things that we described, right? Reprioritization or prioritization of the work items, resolving issues, point of escalation, managing the dependencies, and participates in the program planning activities as well. Okay, y'all with me so far?
Yes, sir. Oh, just Dan.
Thank you, Laz. Okay. Welcome, Brandon. Hopefully your executive steering went well.
Not too bad, thank you.
Now, one of the primary differences in the value-driven PMO over your typical project structure that we talked about is moving steering committees out of projects up into the value stream. Okay, so instead of having a single steering committee per project, you have a steering committee that helps with all of the efforts going on within that value stream, the court system, the fleet system, the utility system, as the case may be. Okay, and I hope to demonstrate for you the value of doing that and how that really helps the program manager's job, the PMO manager's job, as the case may be. So what does a steering team do? The same thing all steering teams do. They make the big decisions. We need you to make decisions. They have the authority. We talked about authority, right? They have the authority to make decisions. Like, if you're not going to delegate that authority to someone else, then make the decision. Anybody have that? Can I hear an amen? Like steering. Make
Agreed.
the decision.
Steer. Actually, do your job. Right?
So we'll talk more about that here in just a bit. But they make the big decisions about value and prioritization. They also ensure that the delivery remains aligned to the strategy. Right? They're the keepers of ensuring the strategy is aligned. They coordinate across other value streams in the organization. We're going to talk about dependencies within value streams, but also dependencies across value streams. Okay. They expedite resolution to issues. That goes along with make the decision. They're always aware of status if we're doing our job right. And they sponsor external communications, right? We want the value stream to be able to communicate outside of the value stream, as opposed to the individual efforts within that. They delegate authority where appropriate, and they serve the team of teams as servant leaders. So in other words, everyone in the organization takes on the mindset of servant leadership. You know, we're going to talk more about servant leadership when we get into the resource management side of things and how resources work. We'll get into that tomorrow in tomorrow's session. But in order for any of this to work, it really starts with, do I really understand what people need? And am I giving that to them as opposed to always pursuing my own agenda? I mean, that's really what empathy is all about, actually. You can do, one of the classes I teach, I'm required to do 2.5 hours on empathy. I feel like I can teach it in 5 minutes, right? Do to other people as you would have them do to you. Full stop. There you go. Put yourself in someone else's shoes. If you can get in emotional empathy, intellectual empathy, and all those various things. And there's a cottage industry out there for that. But key contributor to governance objectives. They're the ones that help the program set up governance objectives that they're accomplishing with the teams. Okay, so let's take a look at how this might view out visually. Okay, so a traditional steering structure is that you have projects with steering committees, right? But essentially, you have an executive team, not necessarily aligned with the value streams, the executive team that is overseeing the program, and then each of those projects have steering committees. Now, in this model, let's soak on this for just a bit if we could. So in this model, who has to integrate all of the objectives of who has to align the strategy, and who has to make sure everything is communicated effectively with one decision in one steering committee that might affect a different project?
The executive team.
Well, it really becomes the program, right?
It's the program manager, right?
Yeah, in a traditional.
So is there a person? Is there a person in the program manager, the PMO, whatever?
Yeah, program, PMO, whatever the case may be.
Okay, then that's the case.
Okay, that means that the program manager or PMO leader has to be aware of everything that's going on within each of those steerings. In other words, they're going to spend their entire week going to steering committee meetings, right? That's what the job is going to be, right? And how do you ensure alignment? Or and you're going to work your full tail off, because I've done this role, right? Where, you're trying to communicate what the executives want and enforce that with people who have a lot more power in the organization that sit within each of those steering committees for each of those projects. This is nearly an impossible task. Can I hear an amen on this? Brandon, is this your life right now? Maybe not to expose any scars, but
Not quite, but it feels that way sometimes.
yeah, because within each of those projects, there's people with power and position within the organization, and so you end up having a pecking order, if you will, that allows for. What really happens here is if people are pursuing their own political agendas, they may exist on one or two of these steering committees, and they're just driving things that are going to negatively impact other projects, right? And so, and the program or PMO leader has to play referee with that. That's really what happens. Okay. Let's go ahead and take a look then at what that steering structure may look like then with a value stream. So, like, if you move steering up to the value stream level, then all of that politics happens there. Okay, so then the program lead, PMO, director, or whatever the case may be, can simply then carry out the outcomes of those battles. Okay, and yes, you will have a facilitation role in terms of helping them come to an outcome, right? But it's a lot easier, at least in my view, not to get dragged into this. What I can tell you is that in one of the organizations I was working with, we implemented we moved the steering out of the projects to the value stream level. In other words, supply chain. It was an organization that did manufacturing and distribution. They had a value stream called supply chain. Supply chain had 5-6 projects going on concurrently. We moved steering from each of those concurrent projects and moved it into the value stream. So you had a supply chain steering committee. It improved the delivery efficiency by 20%. We could demonstrate the value of that shift. And I would say, just from my observation as well as the feedback that we received, the teams felt like they were much more aligned in terms of what they were trying to accomplish. They had clear goals, clear objectives, because the program, instead of trying to deconflict between steering committees, is just simply executing the outcomes of the steering committees. Now, also though, we would say that this can show itself in the fact that for more traditional projects, you may want individual steering committees at each of those levels as well. But that steering would be more of a project management team, so to speak, than a steering. In other words, they're a team that executes as opposed to sets the goals and sets the strategy. Okay. When I say PM team, what I mean is project manager would facilitate that, of course. The application development leader, the integrations leader, the business leader, whatever the case may be. But the role of that PM team shifts from a steering committee approach, like I said, of setting the objectives to just simply carrying out the objectives. And so the program can work much more closely with them within the team of teams as well. Now, why do I not have a PM team on your lean and agile teams?
PM.
There's no PM, right? So if in order for those teams, we expect those teams to work effectively as self-directed, self-organizing teams. So if they're going to be self-directed and self-organizing, they will be the PM team. Okay? Which means then that the program role or the PMO role has to work more directly with them. So in other words, the scale of traditional projects is usually larger project teams anyway. But on the other teams, then the PMO level is working in those sorts of things through the team of teams concept. Okay. And so what you would do is each of those work teams would supply, whether it be architecture, product, PM, business representation. You would have work representation of those work teams in the team of teams, and that's how the program manager, the PMO leader, then carries out their responsibilities in that area. Does that make sense? What do you guys think? Is this doable?
We will be able to apply some of these concepts in the department. Some others are important to know, but are not going to be applied immediately.
Yeah, if you have a really big project, I think this is where Jamie and Dusty and Brandon, you guys were having a realization that these big projects are really programs, right? Where you really have a team of teams that you're working with. So you may actually be closer to this model than you realize in some of those really big projects.
Right, and it is. It's just it's less formal than structure that we're seeing here, but understanding how something would work ideally then helps us to manage those things better, even though there is less formality to the current structure that we have, and something to work toward also.
Yeah. So to help me understand a little bit, what maybe one of you can answer. If we think of the value streams, right, like the court system, is there just one project going on within the court system that Dusty's getting ready to launch? Or are there multiple?
There's usually one running simultaneously, but there's a queue of things stacked up. This is a big implementation, so there's just one. But there could be down the road things running in parallel.
Yeah. So in other words, if you establish steering, that would be essentially the same thing as what we're describing with value stream steering, right? For that big project. So you will likely would find that role, whoever's facilitating that within that value stream, more of an execution role than a political handling sort of role. Although you always have fleas fighting over territory on a water buffalo's butt. I mean, that's always going to happen, right? Sorry, it was a little joke we had, or little saying that I have with politics. It's like sometimes people are just fighting over just the weirdest stuff. It's like fleas fighting over a water buffalo's butt. What if you even win? What did you win, right? So it's always the nature of the beast. All right. So with that, then, let's go ahead then, and we'll by the way, for those of you that are joining us, we take a break at 15 minutes past the hour, and we'll take a 15-minute break. So let's go ahead and move on, though, and I'll introduce the next step, which is the first real step of prioritization. Okay, so taking those work items or those MVPs and MBIs, and we're going to walk that through. We're going to be doing a lot of hands-on with the practical exercise that I sent over. So does everybody have that practical exercise now? Everybody have a copy of it? I think, Laz, you sent it out?
Oh, I did not. Oh, do you want me to? I'm
Yeah,
more than welcome.
if you don't mind. I just didn't know who all was going to be on the call today.
Oh, understood. I will send it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So that's a Word document that you can, type in, print out, write on, or whatever as we do our practical exercises. So we'll spend a good portion of today working through that with prioritize and align. We may get to parts of schedule, but I don't. It's not. I think we'll be okay if we stay with prioritize and align. Okay. The idea being that we establish a clear set of priorities of what it is that we're going to deliver based upon that demand. And then we're going to organize that work into specific deliverables that we're going to call MVPs or MBIs, align those to the patterns, and then later on we're going to talk about actually building this schedule in a program Kanban. Okay, an information radiator or visual representation of the work and when it's going to be delivered. Okay. So, step one, prioritization. And what we're going to talk through is several prioritization models and methods. Some of these you may have heard already. Some may be new to you, but it's ways that the PMO team, the team of teams, can aid the value stream steering in establishing priorities. Moscow method, MSCW. Cost of delay is another method. Another method is buy a feature. Action priority matrix. This is actually one of my personal favorites because thank you, Laz. That's the action priority matrix is, I think, at the program level, one of the better of the prioritization methods, but I may be a little bit skewed because of the way that I want to manage the work on the board. And hopefully that'll come through clearly as we go through this. So, but before we get into priorities, we also need to understand that we may establish those priorities using those different prioritization methods across multiple categories. Okay, so when we talk about priorities, we may have strategic priorities, and typically you think of an imperative, strategic imperative, right? There's a new regulation that's come down. There's a new law that has to be enforced. Security must happen, right? There are strategies that are enablers. They help the organization grow. There's also strategic items that become dependencies. In other words, the strategy itself cannot be fulfilled unless it's delivered. Okay, unless we have this something that maybe not as, I don't want to use the word I'm thinking of, but not as exciting to do, right? Typically in infrastructure, right? Infrastructure has to be done, and it has to be done well, right? Otherwise, Ken gets flooded with tickets. But sometimes there's just some things strategy-wise that you just have to do in infrastructure. I was thinking of one of the programs I had where we were doing a whole new enterprise system that included it was a combination of two SAPs together. And in order to really enable the the shop floor system. So a shop floor system in manufacturing is when orders are actually placed on the line, and you have an automated line, and what is produced and when, and what stock you need and all that sort of thing, right? It goes all the way out to transportation. So that's the shop floor system, which can either be integrated with SAP or you can actually implement modules of SAP. But as we were looking at how to do that, we realized that the data that was going to be transacted, we didn't have the right capabilities within our switches to be able to accommodate that, because and also there were new requirements for things like video capture and things like that were being added. We just didn't have the capability. So it was a hard sell, but we had to go explain to that value stream steering committee of why we needed to spend about $1.5 million on an uplift across the whole enterprise before they would have any hope of implementing their objectives. So that was a dependent strategic category, so to speak. Okay, priority. Economic. This is can be described as high value, medium value, required value. Again, if there are regulatory private corporations, if there are regulatory items that have to be met in order, otherwise to avoid a fine or something like that, then that would be a required value. Technological value. By the way, I wouldn't say that this is a finite list. It's just hopefully a way of helping you think about the different categories to think through when it comes to what priorities you may have, or help to engage with the value stream team and the team of teams. And then organizational, another category. Is this going to increase the value realization for our organization? Are we going to be able to generate greater ROI, return? Oftentimes this has to do with organizations that have to reorganize in some sort of way, right? Just is there going to be a priority there that needs to be accomplished? So do you all have like a priorities categorization? I mean, Laz, you talked about that you get a lot of demand, right? A lot of things come your way. And you expressed that you were looking for how do we handle it. Do you have a current kind of prioritization filter?
In day-to-day system support, incidents and SRs that come to help desk, they do well established. I have written and shared with the leadership at the department suggestions about how to prioritize incidents and service requests with well-defined categories and examples. And I'm working right now on helping define the same for the portfolio of projects that we have, or the ideation set of initiatives that we have as we move them to active projects. So that last part, I still do not have. I'm very recent in this role, but I assure you that if I continue to be here, we will have those priorities well defined.
Yeah. Okay, good. So it sounds like there's a good start. I mean, a lot of organizations I work with, that's the first thing they're like, oh, we need to rank by priority the work coming our way. Like, yeah, absolutely. That prioritization at the demand level is just hugely important. And it is by value stream, right? That is what the value stream steering, one of their primary functions, right? They should be helping to set those priorities. So again, these are just some suggestions of different models. Dusty, what do you think of these? Are these something that anything you'd like to get your thoughts on this and feedback?
There's so many thoughts in my head right now around how we do even planning and prioritization and capacity planning and all that stuff. It's really it's a challenge for us. I mean, there's no other way to say it. We don't have a good model to follow, and that starts at the upper echelon. I mean, there's no enterprise-wide portfolio structure to bring things in and to funnel it down to where they need to know, or work to who needs to know, and what the priorities are inside of that. We're going to start 2023 off. We're going to have 40 departments with money in their budgets, and they're going to start, knocking on the door and saying, hey, I got money to spend. I need you to help me with this project. Some of it's technology, some of it's not. See, that's the thing. Laz is dealing with pure technology for the most part. I'm dealing with a bunch of other stuff and technology, right? I mean, it's just all overlapping, but we've tried. I mean, we've had a lot of conversations about this, and the hard part for us is that every 4 years, maybe, or maybe every 8 years, if we get lucky, the administration rolls over, the leadership rolls over. So, we have to find an opportunity to push in a portfolio management structure, get it well articulated and understood, and get traction so that as the administrations roll over, that doesn't get uprooted and just, left by the wayside. So, Laz is dealing with a different set of problems. The organization as a whole, I think, has the same problems that Laz does, and that is it's shotgun start every January, right? It's like, go spend your money, and there's no way to bring that in at an enterprise level and sort of say, okay, what resources do you need? Where does this need to go? Who needs to help you get it done? Sort of a thing. It's a shotgun start.
Yeah.
So it makes our job hard to plan, right? It makes our job really hard to plan, because Laz is probably getting, project requests from their internal stuff that IT just has to do to keep the lights on and doors open, and they're big enough to call projects. But also somebody at Parks or something comes and say, hey, I need you guys to help me implement this new doodad, whatever that is. So he's got his own set of kind of prioritization problems, because that leads into capacity. I think resource capacity planning is probably one of our most difficult things to do. Because everybody's running scarce. I mean, our resources are all scarce.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. And with resource management, the problem that you have is you need kind of that structure so that you can make sure you align the resources to the structure. So it's always going to be the end of the whip, so to speak. And what it reminds me of is, as we're talking here, very few things that happen in IT don't affect the business side, right? And very few things the business wants to do does not affect IT, right?
And so when I've helped implement portfolio management in for-profits or private sector businesses, the prioritization was a lot easier to define, because it was how much revenue you're going to bring in, how fast you're going to bring it in, right? How much market share you're going to capture, how fast you're going to capture it. Right? There was problems and opportunities to address within the portfolio, and you had the governance or the steering, the VP of fill in the blank, right? Sitting there and saying, okay, this is how we're going to, we have 5 number ones, we have 10 number ones, because that everybody submitted their number ones. How are we going to stack rank that top, the 10 number ones, and figure out what's the most important. And in the private sector, always comes back to money. Cost savings was lower on the scale, but it was always revenue. Market share, fill in the blank, because it was, that's what these guys are doing.
Yeah.
Our landscape is a little bit different, because a lot of stuff that we have coming in and we have to do, we just have to do it, right? And sometimes we have to do it because somebody's telling us we have to do it, because there's political things in play, or, I don't know, legislation comes down, or, we have to replace all of our switches because they're outdated, right? And so coming up with a prioritization model that accounts for all those different dynamics, when it's not just as easy as how much money you're going to make us, it's a hard problem to solve.
Yeah, very good. So cool. So when we come back from break, rather than get into the prioritization methods, which we'll get into after, what I want to do is start exploring the practical exercise that we have. So in that document that Laz sent out, or I think we'll get through these practical exercises today, but we may not get through the last one, is a scenario. It's 2 pages of scenarios. The first is just kind of the background of the organization. The second is the projects that have been requested that we'll be working with. Okay. And yeah, this is a sub of what most enterprises deal with, but hopefully there's a representation of the various types of demand even the city might find within those scenarios. So when we come back from break, we'll start in that area, and then we'll take it from there. Sound like a plan?
Thanks, Dan.
All right, thanks. We'll see you then.